Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. This is going to be the follow-up video from the British Hill Climb Championships, which I have to say thank you. Those of you that watched it already, those of you that supported, but those of you that watched it already, 13,000 of you so far out of like my 16,000 subscribers. That's a big number, and I think that's the quickest a video has grown, at least over the first like 12 to 24 hours. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Not as not as big as the Sacklobber video just yet, but that is at a whopping 45,000 views. So yeah, keep it going. We're we're getting closer to that number. So yeah, let's talk about the British Hill Climb Championships, and more specifically a bit of a deep dive into the analysis. And the reason why I'm doing this video is to just give some insight really and some context to the performance, and to others who finished on the podium. Maybe to those who don't understand the numbers, or maybe they love watching cycling but love to see like a deeper look into how the performance stacks up, versus my best performances and my worst performances. I wouldn't have said this was one of my worst, but it's a bit off par to my usual. I did do a race, not a race, a training session a couple of days before the Nationals, where I just had a bit of a stab for 5 minutes to see what sort of power I could sustain, and that was around the 450 mark. Now my best for 5 minutes ever is 455 watts, so pretty close. But this Nationals, or at least this effort, was a little bit lower than that. But we'll delve right into it, and we'll talk about sort of how I compared as well to other riders, and how I sort of maybe lost the podium place, or how I lost my chance of a better result, shall we say, because lots of people came up to me directly after the finish and said, how did I enjoy that? How did the effort go? And I said at the time that I was really pleased with it. And I am pleased with my performance. Like the way I executed on what I wanted to do, I'm very pleased with. Whether it was the right thing, whether it was the wrong thing, that's why hindsight is a wonderful thing. But at the time, I was very happy with it, and probably less so when I realized I was only 5 seconds off the podium. And I'll show you the results right here. So here's the top 10 for the males, and quick shout out actually to the top 3 in the women's as well. But Illy Gardner, who has also just taken the women's Sacklobber KOM. So go Illy. Great performance. But she's a newly crowned British Hill Climb champion, female. So this was the men's. Bit of a fun fact, but Richard Bussell, the top 3 there, actually, they are top 3 former Hill Climb champions, all 3 of them. And Richard Bussell, in particular, was on a fixed gear bike. And the gearing, I think, was a 3620, but don't quote me on that. So that was an incredible ride to do it on a fixed gear bike, which does mean you don't need brakes. A little bit of an insight for you into British hill climb culture. So I was only 5 seconds off. So that's what kind of maybe gave me, I don't know, a little bit of a bitter sweet taste in my mouth. How close it was. So yeah, let's dive right into it. So I had a couple of people reach out to me privately, and one was publicly, speaking about how come my power, and we'll talk about it right here, I'll highlight my actual effort, how come I only managed to do 435, but for the actual climb section, because there was a bit of flat at the end, 440 watts for 5.5 minutes, 5.5, 6 minutes. And yet when I won in 2019, when I became British champion, I did the same power, or a little bit less. I think it was 425, 430 watts, but for double the time. And I'm not going to go into the science, but for those of you that maybe maybe aren't aware of different riders' physiologies. I'm someone who has a very shallow power curve, and what that means is if I show you this section over here on Strava, so this power curve section, if you ignore the faint line, look at the dark line. My power curve is basically power duration, so the power you produce over the duration. Now over here there's a very, very low drop off, so as you can see the line flattens out to 5 minutes, 435 watts, give or take. But over a longer period of time, my power doesn't drop off very much. So we could have gone, the climb could have been another 5 minutes longer, and my power would only have dropped off to an average of maybe 5 watts less, 5 or 10 watts less. Now, you could have some riders who would drop off a lot more, and they would be stronger over that shorter duration. So mine doesn't drop off much, but that also means I don't have a very high peak. So I don't have like a big punch, big explosiveness. Something I still want to work on, obviously, but that's just a little bit of an insight. Really good real world example. I had to make a note of it to save time, otherwise I'll just ramble. A really good real world example is imagine if there was me, a longer climber type rider versus a sprinter, and we'll use FTP to keep it simple. But imagine if a sprinter can do 1500 watts for 10 seconds, which is maybe 500% of their 300 watt FTP. Now I can only do 900 watts for 10 seconds as my sprint, but that's only 250% of my FTP. But yet I can do half of my sprint power for 5 minutes. So I can do 450 watts, half, for 5 minutes. But can our sprinter do half of their 10-second power for 5 minutes? Which would mean 750 watts for 5 minutes. They can't. And that's a good example of, different sort of rider strengths and weaknesses. So without taking too much more of your time, I want to keep this fairly short because the British Hill Climb Champ video was long enough. My pacing strategy was to go off hard. The number one reason for this was to put other riders under pressure. I wanted to go off harder than I knew I'd be able to sustain for the whole climb, because I didn't know what I was capable of doing in that last minute and a half or 2 minutes. With the crowd, with the tailwind, with things like that, you never know if you're able to actually produce more power or produce less power, but you've got to put yourself in a position where you could potentially be on for a really good day. Like I said in the video, there's people who in the top 10, they could have finished anywhere. Like the people here in the top 10, let's say Will Loudon, for example, if he was on a stormer of a day, he might finish 5th. And I might finish 8th if I had a really bad day. Just using these as an example. But like, people can actually slip and move like lots of places. So this is one of the main reasons why I decided to go with a massive positive split. And you can see that here in that first sort of, let's call it the first 60 to 70% of the climb. I was doing 7.5 watts per kilo, 457 watts. For this first part. But then this is where my average power gets skewed, is this flat section here. It's not really flat, but my power drops a fair bit on this section, which massively skews the average power. It drops massively, but I don't actually have the ability to pick it up at the end, which is disappointing. Like I would have liked to have been able to finish stronger, but I just didn't. Now with an even pacing strategy, I'm going to find you Tom Bell's pacing strategy. I'm going to share this tab. So this is Tom Bell's effort for the whole climb. And Tom usually likes to deploy an even pacing strategy. And 7.3 to 7.5 watts per kilo, again, probably for Tom over this period of time. Look at the cadence. It's just immaculate. Look at the power. It's just immaculate. And he finishes and he just gets everything out over that period of time. This is perfect, sort of like what you'd call like draining your system. Like you're literally, what you're capable of doing, and you just set off and you hold it there for as long as you possibly can, and then you cross the line and you've done everything you can. So it always blows my mind how riders, like Tom and Andy, first and second, second and first rather, are able to not only climb out the saddle for this whole time, but maintain the same cadence the whole time and maintain roughly the same power the whole way. Like, their control when they're riding at this level is just unbelievable. Like, mine is very like sporadic over this sort of time duration because I'm pretty much over the limit. Like, I'm not comfortable. I know I'm not saying these guys are comfortable, but I'm not comfortable on the limit, if that makes sense. So it's a skill. It is a skill. So Tom's data didn't actually show his Strava didn't actually pull up the whole climb. So we've only got this first section of Tom's effort to the cattle grid, which was the first half. And this is where I set off my hardest. I set off to do 460 watts, which would have been really hard to maintain the whole way. But I'm actually going faster up this section than Tom, marginally, but it is slightly faster. So at this point of the climb, at the halfway point, I'm fighting for second place right here. Which is these are positives in my mind, like big positives. So then I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you Andy's ride. So if you've been following my hill climb season quite closely, you'd have seen I've been doing analysis videos of some of the hill climbs I've done. And I've often come up against Andy, come in second, come in third to Andy. And in the analysis, I've been fairly close to him, apart from in the last dying moments of the climb, because he has this snap, this explosiveness, which I think comes from strength training. I think it comes from something that is partly down to bike training, but I think it's also partly down to off the bike training. We can speculate, but it's an explosive effort at the end. And if we look at if we look at the majority of the climb, 491 watts for 4.5 minutes. The majority of the climbs we've come up against Andy on, and this is why the analysis videos are so interesting in my opinion, have had us running fairly close. But Andy's been riding at over 500 watts. So what's interesting about this climb is that he rides under 500, which is like the lowest power output he's produced over most of his hill climbs this season, or at least the ones I've come up against him. But it is at the end where the damage is done. We look at this last section, and most people who have stood on the climb, and you can comment down below, the speed he came past people, the last part of the climb, who were standing there watching, was just another level. It was superhuman. And the power production is where it matters. So when I came into the final few days of prep for this climb, I wanted in my head to have a strong final 30 seconds. I wanted to accelerate hard, because the acceleration is where Andy seems to get the ball rolling for finishing fast. The max speed at the end, not so much, but it's the acceleration to get to that speed earlier before the end. So getting to this top speed, or this rolling average speed, then quicker than the next person. So he's doing 24k an hour over the last 40 seconds. But in doing so has pushed out almost 700 watts for 20 to 30 seconds to get himself up to that speed as quick as possible. Now, if we shoot back to my effort, and I'll share this tab with you. Now, my effort's completely different. I'm still doing 15, 16k an hour here up until this point where it accelerates to the line. But that's too late, or not too late, but I'm unable to raise my speed. And we look at this last section, and it's incredibly different in speed. And this is where the damage is done. And you'll be absolutely amazed when you see this, because I was slightly shocked, but I was also I was shocked more at the time that I lost more than how it happened, because throughout this season, this is how I've lost, or this is how this is what has been preventing me from, potentially challenging, is this last effort in the dying embers of the climb. This is actually a virtual comparison on the hill of me and the winner. And throughout, and bearing in mind, obviously I did a positive split, so I rode hard and I died off towards the end, whereas Andy, he rode sort of within himself, but also, kind of on the limit almost, but then kicked hard in that final. You can see that if I had had something left to give, then this wouldn't have been as exaggerated as it was. But because I was dying off and because he was accelerating, it was having an opposite effect. So we were going in opposite directions, which obviously makes it look worse. Or not look worse, but that's how I hemorrhaged time so much in that last section. But it's a lot of time. In that final kilometer, I go from being 2 seconds, in the final 500 meters, I go from 2 seconds to being 25 seconds down. But it's the speed difference here, not even on the steepest section, which is quite funny, because people have been saying, your bike is 700 grams heavier than the rest of the people in front of me. The disc brakes are slowing me down. But actually, that's not the reason why I can't keep up here. The reason is because my power was dropping off, and for example, Andy's power was going through the roof. So that's the reason why I hemorrhaged time. The interesting bit is that throughout the whole steep section of the climb, I'm only losing up to 6 seconds here over this section. So it's less about, well, it is still about it. I'm not sitting here saying that I'm not losing time because of weight. I'm sitting here and saying that I'm actually running a fairly decent race up until the last 40-50 seconds virtually. So that's that is my, we can actually see other riders as well. So Richard Bustle here in second. We're fairly even throughout, and then he just has that little bit of an edge right at the end. That grunt, that power at the end is something that I need to work on. And I'm not afraid to sit there and say that it's weaknesses that you've sometimes got to spend your whole career working on just to get anywhere near, anybody else in your field. But also, to a certain extent, I enjoy pushing myself outside the comfort zone in events where I'm trying to put myself up against, some really tough competition. So it was a really good event, and I managed to do a performance at the time, and I am still now proud of. So I am still very, very happy. So that's going to wrap up this video. It's a long one. It's half the time of of the actual event video itself, but I felt like it was worth going into some of the analysis, because sometimes the context can make us better cyclists, and also can help the sport progress, help people progress. So if you enjoyed this video, if you watched the event video, feel free to comment down below. Maybe what was your highlight of the video? What surprised you the most? Is there anything I would change personally? The only thing I would change is, like, looking at it now and looking at like how everybody else rode the climb. I'd still ride it the same. Like, I would still put myself in a position where I could be even pegging with the others up until that final bit. The only thing I would change is actually probably my preparation, and being able to have that grunt at the end, and being able to potentially punch higher. But we have a long time to address that. I'm still only 28. And I'm still learning, so I'm looking forward to moving forward and seeing what comes of this winter and next year. So thank you so much for watching and being part of this series. I've thoroughly enjoyed the performance side, but I've also thoroughly enjoyed making the videos. So again, thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you very soon.